So a little bit of a caveat, all of these numbers that you guys are going to see are normalized. Uh, the cold hard facts are that pastors get paid based on two primary things: what's in the budget and what is your role on staff and your responsibilities. So another way to put that is how much of the ministry are you responsible for and how big is the ministry. So a youth pastor at a church with a $2 million budget is going to earn more than a youth pastor at a church with $1 million budget, even if they may have similar sized youth groups. Maybe you both got 100 kids in the youth group, different budgets. You're probably going to get paid more at the church with a larger budget. So all that means that comparing youth pastor salaries across the board can be really hard, because averages can get skewed by a lot of highly paid or poorly paid employees. And so it's really hard to compare salaries from across the board, because we've got youth pastors serving at churches with multiple campuses and multi-million-dollar budgets, and then you've got youth pastors serving at small town churches where it's just you and a senior pastor. And I've been at those churches myself. So if you see numbers in here and you think to yourself, oh wow, I'm definitely not getting paid that much money, or you think I'm getting paid way more than that, am I overpaid? The answer is probably no to both of those, because these numbers are sort of somewhere in the middle in this no man's land, so that we can draw comparisons across the board. So if you want to know a good average or a good median salary number for yourself, that's where a church salary report would pull a sample of everybody that's serving at a similar sized church, and then it would show you like what your peers are, what your cohort, and what they're earning. That's the best way to look at salary. But that said, let's talk a little bit about region. So this is a map. I'm going to throw that whole thing up there. So this is a map of just the US and the average salary for youth pastors based on region. The darker the color is, the higher the average salary. So the first thing you'll notice is that the pay is higher on the coast. Basically, California is driving that west region, and they've got the highest paid youth pastors in the country. Behind them is New York and New Jersey. And then you get into the mid-Atlantic region in Virginia and Pennsylvania, and then you get down into the Southeast and the Bible Belt. Southwest is the third one there. We'll get to that. So pay is highest on the coast, but the cost of housing is highest out there as well. Dan, you can talk about how hard it is to buy a house on a youth pastor salary later, but I guarantee you that that's a big consideration. Even though you may get paid more in California, it's harder to live out there. So even though this is the sort of overall ranking, even though the Southwest is third, because of the cost of living in the West region as well as the New York, New Jersey area, my guess is that the best bang for your buck you're going to find is in Texas. Seems like salaries are pretty good there. Beyond that, in the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic, I think if you're serving in a suburban church, in the Bible Belt or in the Mid-Atlantic region, and you're serving in a suburb, you're probably going to have a good salary overall. But those areas are lower because they're mixed in with youth pastors that are making barely livable wages at small churches and small towns and rural areas. So there's a lot of mix going on there with those regions. All right, wage growth. So let's talk about wage growth. So Dan's talked about this before, and feel free to weigh in if you want to, Dan, because you're more familiar with the California situation. But it looks like wages are growing for youth pastors year over year, around 2%. But when you dig into the numbers, they're not growing in every region, and they're not growing consistently across the country. And my best guess is that California is driving a lot of that growth. This is what the California average salaries look like. And California's been growing by about 4% every year. And I think that's pushing a lot of the growth that we're seeing in the overall averages. Inflation has been flat for the last couple of years, at least until the pandemic hit. And so wages overall for pastors have been fairly flat, haven't been increasing that much. Of course, that's been the case for the whole country, but the pandemic has thrown everything into flux. So we'll see if wages continue to grow for youth pastors in the coming year. All right, let's talk education. So this is probably the most, see if I can bring that up. There we go. All right. So this is probably the most interesting slide to me for youth pastors, Basically, we see the clearest sort of stair step phenomenon when you look at education levels with youth pastors, more so than senior pastors or any other pastors that we run the numbers for. You see the clearest increases between degree levels with youth pastors. Basically, the numbers that we have in terms of normalized salary is at least a $6,000 a year increase for a master's degree or to go to seminary. Now that may not seem like a lot, but over 6 to 8 years serving as a youth pastor, that's $36,000 to $48,000 extra that you would make serving there. And I would go so far as to say, which we'll talk a little bit about later, that getting a higher degree is going to give you options down the road as far as moving up within the church. So if you want to move up to an associate pastor role or a family pastor role like Frank is working in. So in terms of actual raw numbers, a bachelor's degree is worth an extra 9 to 10% over a high school degree, and a master's is worth 13 to 16% over a bachelor's. And believe it or not, there are youth pastors with doctorates out there. I've met a few of them, and they earn more than youth pastors that have master's degrees, which is not the case for all the pastors. So that's a pretty interesting and clear-cut impact in terms of education and salary.
Aaron, can I just add something real quick to that?
Yeah, sure.
I would just also say in my surveys, one of the things that I've found is people think youth pastors don't have a ton of education, but it's actually gotten extremely competitive. We're seeing at least 3/4 of youth pastors now have completed an undergrad degree, and almost like 45% of them have completed a master's. And so if you aren't on the education bandwagon, I would really recommend that as a possible growth strategy for your career.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and especially in terms of competition, right? If you're competing against other youth pastors and there's such a clear-cut benefit in terms of salary, and they're looking at you and somebody else, and you've got a seminary degree, that's definitely going to be a bonus. And we'll talk about that more some later.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about gender. So we tried to get some female youth pastor panelists on our webinar today, but because of summer camps and scheduling issues, they weren't able to join us. But gender is an interesting thing among youth pastors, because as you can see, youth pastors are actually approaching a 50-50 gender mix. It's actually 43-57 in the latest numbers that we have from Church Salary. Children's pastors are obviously at the top, but children's and youth pastors are sort of your top two mixed roles. And what we see, unfortunately, is that the gender wage gap for female youth pastors is around 13%, which is way higher than the national average, which at this point is actually closer to 9%. And so what that means is that female youth pastors, with their resumes being equal, end up earning around 87 cents for every dollar earned by their male peers. Practically speaking, that means that a female youth pastor with a bachelor's degree may actually end up earning less than her male peer who only has a high school diploma, or a female youth pastor that goes to seminary and gets a seminary degree may actually earn less than a male who has just a bachelor's degree. And obviously that's all kinds of problematic, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on there.